Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 309 of my modded Factorio playthrough. Most of the research is done. Got through all of that expensive expert crafting speed, so our character is as fast as it's going to get now. So we can figure out some more stuff to add in here. Don't want to go too fast and add a bunch of stuff in, but we kind of have to put a bunch of this in here, and it's probably going to research really fast. But one thing we've been looking forward to for a while now is our extra logistics, specifically the active provider and the buffer chests, which will really help. I don't know if I want to go through the entire factory changing all of that because there's a lot of storage chests all over the place and they're all perfectly configured as well. But nonetheless, having those chests will help for anything in the future we do. So you might as well hit that, and then it unlocks all kinds of stuff, but unfortunately things like this require that yellow research, which we don't have. What this does is make it so bots won't hurt things when they crash, which they currently do. So if we research this enough times, eventually it'll get to 10,000 or so when all of our bots are covered, but still requires gold, so we can't do anything there. But we do have these other things, like we can upgrade our warehouses, but we don't really use warehouses anymore. In fact, I'm thinking of removing that mod. I think that's for angels, I believe, the angels warehouses. But nonetheless, I'll add it in here. And they also have that same version for the logistics silos. The main thing that we would want is the strong box, because then that would give us logistics for the really big chests. And I think these look better and work better with the game than the angels versions do. But unfortunately, that does require those yellow research packs, so we're not going to get very far. Or is that gold? I'm not sure, since the alien research kind of has its own color. I don't know if I would call that yellow or gold. But I might be using those terms interchangeably. Because if you look at some of our upgrades, like Power Armor 4, instead of this yellowish looking thing, it uses something that's a little brighter. And I guess that is called gold. That's the actual name of it. So I believe it is correct to be calling this yellow. But that's all we can do for now. With logistics, we'll have to cover the logistics when we get to that point. But let's throw some other stuff in here. How about the more powerful steam engines that just require titanium? And the steam turbine version as well, which requires similar resources, except also requires circuits, which we do have. We can hit the industrial furnace. Basically, it's a much larger version of the electric furnace. That it's faster, holds more modules, and you can select a filter, so it's like a filtering furnace basically. Just bigger, so anytime we have a setup that uses a lot of these, this can help. But we don't really use the electric furnaces for much of anything, since most of it's handled by Angel's machines. But nonetheless, we will have it if we need it. And I guess since we did the power stuff, we probably should do Heat Pipe 3 as well, which is silver and titanium. It just has a higher temp limit. Wonder why we can't do Heat Exchanger 3. Ah, because it's a tungsten item. So we're not quite there yet. And how about we hit the 10 gigawatt transformer as well? We don't really use it for much except for those pumps. But the recipe isn't really configured properly for Angel Bobs, so it just requires iron and copper and steel, just increasing amounts of it as it gets bigger. And that's a lot of copper wire. If you look at the raw resources, 3.1k of copper wire go into that with all the previous tiers. That might be more relevant than Heat Pipe 3, but we can worry about that later and just let everything in here research for now. It'll probably research much faster than I can get around to it. But I've been expanding the robot network and the concrete. So now they are getting very close to getting the top of the base covered. And then everything will be good. I have done some other stuff off screen. I don't really exactly remember, because usually between every group of episodes that I record, it's usually about 20 episodes or so. I try to do a lot of smaller factory fixes that aren't really worth showing on an episode, I think. And one of them I did was massively increase the performance of our sodium hydroxide generator from salt, because we are now recovering all of it. And you see this warehouse is getting awfully big. And it's that big after filling up on 80,000 plus of sodium hydroxide. So we might not be able to capture all of our salt like that and just have to dump it like we have been. But I did hook up this setup. Wow, those researches are fast. With a long belt, because now that we have faster belts, this can go all the way down to our tier 3 of ore mixtures. So I unhooked this giant setup from that. So we'll have to see if that works. Man, that's fast. I guess I haven't been researching in a while, so there's a huge supply of research packs. That's kind of what happens. And yeah, it's basically going at full speed of the belt. That's funny. So we have enough science consumption to use an entire red belt, or at least half of a red belt of science packs. Good to know. Well, we'll have a lot of stuff to cover. But our main source of saline water was this tree setup. And one other thing I did is I've reset the audio levels of a lot of these machines because I adjusted them to make them easier for YouTube. But since they were changed in that recent-ish update, the audio levels anyway, I disabled a lot of my changes, so some of these machines are too loud. It's definitely those tree arboretums need to be changed. So I'll just have to write all this down and get to it later. But one thing that I changed was the output of all of these trees, because up until this point, these trees, if available, have been going to make these wood blocks here, which are a good fuel source if they come from trees. And that's probably not the best use of it, because then it would just inevitably get burned here, and that was generating a lot of saline water, and it's not really generating that much power as a result. So I've decided to start unhooking some of this tree stuff, just in attempt to not make so much saline water. So I'm wondering if we can use the status of the saline water to shut these down, just to try to not generate too much of it. And since saline water is kind of like a controlled resource, we might want to do like salt instead. So how about if this warehouse gets to like 40,000, we start shutting methods off. So let's go down there and adjust that. And probably most of the research will be done by the time we get that taken care of. So it is what it is. Some research is very fast and some of it's very slow. Just because I want to try to close loop this whole thing and not waste anything. So if we actually don't have any room for salt, and we don't really need to be growing trees when we have coal that can do the same thing, it just saves us on a little bit of coal, but it's not like we really have that much trouble with coal anyway. Let's see, this one would need to be 4,000, and then this would need to be 5,000 to give it a higher priority if it was available. So this method here wants 1,000 and it has the highest. Then this one will turn on if it has 2,000. This one turns on if it has 3. The trees will try to fill it up to 4. And the algae will try to fill it up to 5. And that's kind of how priority systems work. But that's going up, but we don't want that hooked up there. We want those two hooked up, and they are, so same condition exists. So our trees are going to continue to generate a bunch of salt. And we'll have to hope that when it gets to 80k that it shuts off and the factory isn't like completely overloaded. I'm not sure how fast this would need to be, but since it seems to be going a little slow, let's give it a red. And all of our research is done just like that. So we'll let that go and see how everything works. And we have our 2 fuel sources now, which we need to have a priority set between them. And kind of the question here is, which one do we want to run first? That tries to keep it up to 80. And that one tries to keep it up to 90. Seems to make sense. So yeah, I guess we'll just hook the blocks up for now. And it is hooked up, because power is slightly low. Although, one thing I've thought of is that power signal is actually based on this one accumulator, and I'm not sure if it discharges at the same rate of the rest of the factory. I'm guessing that it doesn't, because this number looks different on the bar graph than this one right here. And I believe our factory still does have, yeah, 2 of these left. Well, it's certainly going to confuse the factory when these get replaced. For a little while anyway. But we'll replace that one, and I believe the other one is down here. And there we go. It'll balance out eventually. And the funny thing about the wood blocks is they actually create more pollution than the enriched fuel blocks do, but it's only one setup of power here rather than essentially 6 times that for fuel blocks, so it won't really generate that much power in the end, but I'm just trying to make the factory nice and closed loop. So what this means is we're probably going to be maxed out on salt pretty much all of the time. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just a resource we use for other things. Well, since we have so much new stuff to do, we probably should just go down our list on our character inventory and just see which things we can build that are highlighted, and that's an awesome feature that Factorio has. And since nothing is highlighted here, we know there's nothing there to click on. Oh yeah, we had Beacon 2, but I don't think we're making Beacon 1 yet, and since I don't have a need for them quite yet, I'll skip by that. And of course our logistics, which are exciting to get into. We can make some stuff to protect our character, but we don't really need to worry about that right now, since we're not fighting very many biters. And I would like to research better bots, but that's a pretty big thing in itself. But one thing that would be nice is making these 2 new chests. So before we talk about those, we might as well construct them. And kind of annoyingly, we would want to do it here. And all of this is in the way. So, do we want to just pick this up and move it? This has been my little hidey hole spot for a while now. But most of the belts are already in here, so... Okay, let's make a bunch of storage chests, I suppose. Like right there. Alright, let's pick all this up then. It's been pretty useful as is, so I don't really want to change any of it. So let's put it, like... I guess in the way of this road. I don't know, that feels kind of unwise to do if the road moves again. Which it might if we're making better bot types. So let's put the hidey hole up there. So here come bots. They're taking some of the gears over there because that chest is no longer full, or at least it was no longer full, but now it will be again. But now they have all these items they need to move. They're doing a pretty decent job of it. It's kind of funny to see bots do that and how they attempted to keep this stuff kind of sorted, but also kind of failed in some circumstances. That's funny how they're just done. And here's our car. We haven't used it in forever. I guess the prospectors are still in there. But let's move the car, I suppose. Put it over there. And now that that's mostly built, when we pick all of this up, they will now sort them correctly. And they're putting them back there because those other chests are full again. And I guess good thing all those charge ports were right there. Man, that's a lot of bots. Okay, we've got more space. We need to build 2 new chest types. And I almost wonder if we should do something like this for our other setup as well. Down here, because having 3 chests ends up being a lot of resources stuck in them. And a blue stack inserter by itself is pretty fast, and we don't really need that many of those machines, so I almost want to just reduce all of those to 1. But we'll see, because these have been working just fine on 1, so maybe we should do the same thing. That would certainly make the setup a lot smaller, because then the machines could be side by side like this, and if they needed to direct insert, they could, but otherwise it would be tighter, so maybe we should try something like that. But we need to pick this stuff up and put it right here. And while we are here, this is a situation where we really shouldn't be using these storage chests. We'd want to use a buffer chest. And I'll kind of explain the difference in a second here. But now we'll have our buffer chest here. And we want the logistics request just to be the item that we're making. So we'll switch this to active provider and switch this to buffer chest. So we'll make a request for active provider, but 500 may not be big enough. So what about like 5,000? Because how many could fit in here? Because they stack in units of 50, which would mean we'd want 2,400 of them. So we'll type that in there. And then this for those. And that's a more reliable way of getting those chests in there. And is there anything here that we need to direct insert? Doesn't look like it. So we'll have our 1 requester chest And we do need to put the modules in there. Oh wow, those things can take productivities? Who would have guessed? We are here, so there's no reason not to upgrade these. And the better electronics assemblers. And now we have an extra module slot. And we've already been configured for productivities, so any of them that can take them will. And then let's change this. The best we can get out of it is -50 and -50, and then -75 and -75 in that last slot. Doesn't matter. Then we'll upgrade everything else that couldn't use them. And I believe we are mostly set up now, where instead of having to set up a bunch of chests, we just have these two. Except I put that in the wrong one. So let's pick that up. Probably wouldn't have mattered in the end, but let's set it to the correct recipe. And we could use our fast inserter. There's really no reason not to. And we'll make that the case for all of these. So provider chests, 50. Buffer chests, 50. And let's check to see if this can keep up. And it looks like the yellow inserter has no trouble at all. Well, I suppose upgrading all those other machines would kind of show the value of buffer chests. So perhaps we should do it. So let's talk about them. Buffer chests and active provider chests. They do have their specific uses. A buffer chest is a provider and a requester in the same chest. That's basically all it is. You can call it whatever you want and use it for whatever you want. But ultimately what it does is it requests and it supplies. And then the active provider chest is what I like to call the anywhere but here chest. And that is, if anything finds its way into the chest at all, it will get pushed anywhere else but that chest. So it kind of depends on your application. So buffer chests are useful when you have a lot of storage chests like this. So right now, when we moved it, the bots certainly tried to put all of these in here. But notice how it's not full anymore because we used some of them. And now those items are stuck in this warehouse because they're considered equal. If that other chest was a buffer chest and it was making a request to fill itself up, then it would still function as the repository for any extras that the factory have, but it would have a priority over this one. So let's switch it. And in here, we've got 48 stacks of 100, so it's 4,800 in here. Brass gears, we want 4,800. So now that we do that, you see that the bots pick up those gears and drop them over. So now this will stay full. It looks like one extra bot came over. But before we kind of had the problem where there was empty space there, and then we would pick up some gears, and then the bots would just take them back here instead of over there. But by using the buffer chests, now they will have a priority. And I don't really feel like going through the entire factory and changing everything because that's just kind of annoying. But one thing we can do is just anytime any extra resources get stuck in here, it means that not being configured in that way is causing an issue. Because you always want to have at least one storage area or repository for any junk that doesn't otherwise have somewhere to go. And that's what this has always been. Now doing this can create a bit of a loop. Right now it's kind of hard to tell because we have all of these in our storage warehouse right here, so they're pulling from here. But what happens if this storage warehouse was empty? So as an example, something that's right next door are these steel bearings. What happens if we change this to be a buffer chest and requested all of those steel bearings? Well, if there were any in here, it would send them. But then the problem is a lot of these malls here are being supplied by passive provider chests like this. So let's do a bit of an experiment here. Let's change this, specifically the one that holds the gears, to be a buffer chest, but request nothing. And then we will do this, change this to that, and make it the 4,800. Does it pull from down here? Because that's not what we want to see it do. It does not. It pulls from here instead. But that's kind of what we're looking for here. So let's get rid of that request again. And let's change every one of these. At least at these moles. Because there's a lot of them. Or at least they're all in a straight line. Which does make them easy to replace. Is that all of them? I think so, because we didn't really use bots to build things prior to that point. So, now that all of those have been changed, let's come back here and set this again for our 4800 and see what happens. It is picking them up and delivering them, but it looks like it's from down here. And we actually don't need this anymore, because that's being used to supply our character. But since we have those malls, we don't really need them. If we hover over this, it hasn't made any requests anymore. It's trying to, but there isn't a chest in the factory that can supply it. So it cannot pull from another buffer chest to make it happen. And did we do the same for gears? For the most part. We do have these provider chests here that are being used for inventory, and for the same reason. We don't really need them. And I'm not even sure we really need to supply our character with those plates, but as long as it's not a problem, I kind of don't want to mess with it in case it's something that's being used for some other method. And that is at least part of the magic of buffer chests. They can be used for a lot of things, but I kind of would rather use them when we actually need them for something. And right now, the most convenient use of them is to keep this thing from getting overloaded. And we have a single hazard concrete in there, but that's alright. We're kind of replacing concrete right now, so that's to be expected. And bots are continuing to work? Oh yeah. They are toiling away. And I see we are now up to 70k of salt, so our trees have definitely been running and making a bunch of stuff. So did the methods turn off properly? Kind of, but this one didn't. And that's kind of the biggest use of it, so probably should check that. Oh, I think I know what I did. I got the numbers reversed. Or I think I set that one to 80k, but really the best method should have been set to 80k, not the worst method. So we've just been making a bunch of salt in the meantime. Oh well. Well, there are a lot of uses for sodium hydroxide. We just haven't quite gotten to that point yet. That's set to 80, but it really should be set to 40 to make its priority the lowest. And because this carbon dioxide here doesn't replace much of anything, so we're not getting rid of any byproducts by doing it in this way, we'd probably want it to be set at 80. So that one is 80, this one is 60, and that one is 40. So that should be the best use of them, but soon all of these methods are going to turn off. And then we're just going to have to consume some salt first. So we'll see how that works, and if salt gets completely overloaded, we might just need to process it back into water and dump it. It's not particularly efficient, but I'm not sure if we'll still be overloaded on it after using all these methods. And these plants seem a little loud, the liquefiers. So I'll put that on my list of sounds to adjust, so it's a little easier for YouTube. The main reason why I change all those sounds is I don't like the idea of just turning the game audio down and making it really quiet. Just because a couple machines are really loud. I'd rather make those really loud machines where they should be, and then have the game audio kind of where it should be normally. Okay, well, we covered the use case of the buffer chest, or at least one use case. We'll have to cover the other ones later. And the other thing we need to cover are the active provider chests, or in other words, the anywhere but here chest. And you have to be careful where you put those, because these chests always want to push their items out, wherever they happen to be. So you can't really use them somewhere like right here, because if we did, every time they'd get put in there, the robots would just pick them up and take them elsewhere. So you kind of need to think, where would you want to put them? And we don't really have that many places in the factory right now. So really, you would just want to analyze any given chest and think, is this an anywhere but here chest? Our factory does have a few of those chests. It's just, it's usually not relevant. But let's go fly over to one. All the way at the edge of the factory here. Robots are helping. And it's the chest that's responsible for sending orbs on their way. And it's not that big a deal. But actually, you kind of see a problem right here. And I didn't even notice this until now. where we have 1.4k of alien artifacts just hanging out in here. Is there any reason why we would want to be holding on to alien artifacts here? And the answer is no. This is the perfect example of an anywhere but here chest because it does nothing by being here. So, first of all, why is it there? And my guess is because it has nowhere else to go. This is at 45,000. It's not completely maxed out, but we'll get a different functionality if we change this to an actor provider and anything but here. Now, 1.4k is going to be picked up by robots. And here they do come. And it looks like, just like that, we are maxed out on salt, so hopefully all these methods have turned off, and they have, so these are the primary methods that generate salt, because they come from trees. But I see another issue, that even if we have this supply right here, which is from algae that doesn't create any saline water at all, we'd want that to actually go through. So that's kind of tricky. We'll have to take a look at that, but here they come. Picking up those items and dropping them off. So I couldn't tell you why they weren't doing that before. Something something storage chest something something, but that's kind of what you would use them for. Is if you have any items at all that are in chests that you just really don't want them to be there, and they really have no point in being there, then that is something to use an active provider for. And salt is increasing, but that kind of makes sense because at least there's going to be some robots that are basically in buffer because they're moving stuff around until this kind of stabilizes. But we'll go down there and check. But before we do that, we can replace this chest right here because there's another 247 items in there for reasons. But we switch that over, and now robots are coming to pick them up. And while we fly down there, take a look at our resources. Finally, nickel's looking great, and everything else is looking great. They're kind of fluctuating a little bit, but all the numbers are fine. And I'd also like to make sure that trees aren't still going for some reason, and they're not. So that should mean that not a lot of robots are delivering salt anymore. And that is the case. So we essentially have two different outputs. One is based on the condition of salt, and the other one is based on the warehouse itself. So these three controls, 1K, 2K, and 3K, are all probably fine for this going in there. I probably made it a little more complicated than it needed to be by having these controls all around rather than just hooking them up right here. So we'll try to set the warehouse to 5,000. So our enabled condition needs to be 2 green squares. And this does mean that it'll just be a solid, simple condition here of 80k. As long as salt is not overloaded, it can continue to produce it, but I kind of don't want it to always be at 80k in case that's like an issue. So how about to test this out, let's just leave it at 10k and see what happens over time. And then this other one can just be the wood pellets. If it's under 5,000, it can turn on. And it says we have a green square here. That's because these are not connected to the right things. Alright, no green squares for either of those because the condition is fine both ways. So we don't need that. Then we'll do this, equal to 2. And it's shut off. So now trees aren't supplying this anymore. So we'll turn all those on. Let them fire up. And I suppose we have a lot of red belts to place. I'll just try to do it quickly with my character. And salt keeps going up, which worries me. Because, I mean, it comes from multiple places. There we go. So we'll just have to see how it works. Not a big deal if it overloads. Alright, I believe we had one more orb repository that is over here. And are there items in there? There are, and for some reason, there's 11k of them in there. Shrug? Well, not anymore, as you can see. Robots are on the way. There they are. And actually, while we're here, we can pick up some orbs. And one thing I did figure out is there is a special item pickup for dropped cargo, because those random little chests that robots drop are not items on the ground. But if you search for cargo here, there is a cargo item that you can create. So a filter for items on the ground and dropped cargo items. Hello, bots. Kind of accomplishes the goal. Let's see if we can find one to kind of show you. I've kind of manually picked up most of them, so there's probably not a lot of them left over. And since we've been covering the network, there isn't much to see, but I suppose we can use the planner and just see if we can find something. Oh, they're there. Because you see it shows robots. Okay. So here's an example. These little dropped cargo chests when the robots crash. So if you have that filter, you can reapply that. They normally automatically get the deconstruction X, but if a really long time goes without them being selected, they will be turned off there. So I do want to cover the entire base at some point. Once it's been fully covered with robots, that can be our celebratory thing. And like, we would cover over the water here and see that there's 39 or 38 crashed robots. But the network doesn't go necessarily into the water, so we won't be able to pick them all up. But I don't terribly mind sending them across the wall here. And if there so happens to be any crashed robots in there, that's fine. So we'll just make sure we're only selecting the network. And cover everything. The gathering turrets may not be doing their thing, but we have our options. Now the items are being sent to where they need to go. And how are the storage warehouses here? 138k of tungsten, but only 260k of residuals. So we've about gone through half of our residuals, which is pretty nice. I kind of do want to put this on the circuit HUD. So let's see, which one of these is for that HUD combinator? Because I do kind of check this a lot, so it would be nice to not have to do that. So we'll put it on there as one more thing. Let's call this the repository. But anyway, that'll be nice if we ever want to check it. And robots are working away, and they're actually placing them where they need to go now. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to work on radars and better solar panels. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.